A history of Scottish clans, tartans, and kilts. Thank you to Saley for sponsoring this video. While getting swept away in the latest season of Outlander, or researching your own Highland heritage, you might wonder about these key elements of Scottish culture and history. What was a clan and how did they work? Does my last name mean that I belong to a certain clan and that I can only wear that clan's tartan? What is a tartan? What is a kilt? And what do Scotsmen wear under them? Strap on your sporran or pin up your bonny wee tartan shawl, and let's answer these questions and more as we explore the history of the Scottish clan system, tartans and kilts. Early tartan and kilts. The oldest element of this history is tartan, a textile pattern created by weaving dyed wool threads, where the warp and weft, or vertical and horizontal, match. Thus, a square design is created which is identical if turned 90 degrees. In North America, we often refer to this as plaid, but plaid describes any crisscross design, even a rectangular one. All tartans are plaids, but not all plaids are tartans. The earliest known tartan was discovered not in the Highlands, but in China, dating to 3000 BCE. The Romans recorded Gauls of continental Europe sporting tartan in 19 BCE. The earliest documented tartan in Scotland was excavated in Falkirk and dates to the 3rd century. The undyed pattern of light and dark wool was stuffed in a jar of Roman coins. The Middle Ages are littered with references to tartan. It took skill and was only produced by the best weavers for the wealthy, but eventually it became more ubiquitous. Colors and patterns were not yet tied to a clan, but made with whatever natural dyes were available in the area at the time. Both men and women wore tartan, cut into various garments, but the kilt was not one of them until the 1500s. So the iconic Braveheart battle scene, where Highlanders raised their kilts to moon the English, in the 1300s would have been impossible. Kilts became common during the 16th century boom in the wool industry. Waterproof and warm, wool was far superior to linen in the harsh Highland weather. Cattle drovers and sheep herders had to walk miles a day, and stomping through muddy puddles in wool trousers meant hours of heavy, damp clothes. But with a kilt worn above the knee, the wool was kept dry. The original garment was called a great kilt. It was pleated and belted around the middle. The top half could be used as a coat or a camp blanket when sleeping out of doors. A common joke in Scotland is that the kilt got its name because the last person to call it a skirt got kilt. But in reality, the word comes from the Old Scots for the method of pleating the fabric. Kilts were also practical garments for soldiers during long, wet marches. But contrary to the popular image of kilted men charging into battle, they would remove their cumbersome kilts and fight wearing only knee-length linen undershirts. As elastic was not invented until 1845, underwear wasn't a thing. Fastidious Highlanders might have tucked the ends of their undershirts between their legs and into their belts to protect the clan jewels from the breeze. But that was all they would have worn under their kilts. To protect sundry valuables, a sporran, or purse made of leather or fur, was worn front and center. Typical shoes were brogues, a leather walking shoe with holes to allow water to escape, and laces tied around the sock to hold it up. Elastic was also not available for knee socks, a necessity to keep the lower leg warm in the chilly Highlands. So straps of tartan, called flashes, were tied under the knee as a garter. A sin-dhu, or knife, was tucked into the garter for eating and self-defense. In the 1720s, English industrialists came north to employ or exploit Scottish labor in mines and ironworks. Loose wool garments were hazardous next to blast furnaces, so the small kilt was designed. It eliminated the upper cloak and featured a flat apron in front and pre-sewn pleats in the back, so workers could belt it on quickly and get down the mine. This is the style of kilt we typically see today at weddings and in military parades. So how did kilt and tartan go from practical garments made with whatever colors were available to formal attire with as many rules as there are pleats and catalog books at every shop on the Royal Mile telling you which pattern you should wear based on your last name? To answer this, let's take a look at the history of the Scottish clan system. In Gaelic, clan means children, and this denotes their biggest misconception. Today we think of clans as families, with the chief as the benevolent father to his loyal blood relations. But let's straighten all that out. In 843, Kenneth MacAlpin consolidated the kingdoms of the Picts and Dalriada to establish the kingdom of Alba, later known as Scotland. Meanwhile, many of the isles to the north and west were controlled by Vikings. In the early 1100s, a warrior named Somerled rebelled against the Vikings in the Western Isles. He took the title Thane of Argyll and was endorsed by King David I, who was pleased to have the Norse off his doorstep. Somerled married Ragnhild, daughter of the Norse king of the Northern Islands, and they had 3 sons. When Ragnhild's brother, Godfrey the Black, came to the throne, he ruled with cruelty. His people rebelled, and Somerled supported them. His ships were fitted with the latest naval technology, rudders, and their maneuverability meant that he easily defeated his brother-in-law. Now Somerled controlled the islands to the west and the north, and he was declared King of the Isles in 1156. But he had too much power for the liking of the new King of Scotland, the weak and unpopular Malcolm IV. Somerled sailed his army to the mainland, intending to fight the king. But on the way, he was betrayed by his nephew, who had been bribed by Malcolm. Somerled was assassinated, and his leaderless army sailed home. The kingdom of the Isles was divided amongst his 3 sons, Angus, Dougal, and Ronald. These 3 brothers formed the first clans of Scotland. Angus took his father's name and formed Clan Somerled, anglicised to McSorley. Dougal founded Clan MacDougall. Ronald had 2 sons, Rudy, patriarch of Clan MacRory, and Donald, founder of Clan MacDonald, the largest clan with many subgroups. Mac means son of in Gaelic, while O, commonly used in Irish surnames, means descendant of. DNA studies suggest that as many as 500,000 people alive today are descended from Somerled. The Vikings were now out, and the Scottish throne was under weak leadership. The power vacuum allowed these early clan chiefs to become powerful warlords. They dominated families living near them, who accepted their protection in exchange for tribute in the form of food, money, and military service. Over the following centuries, other clans emerged across Scotland. Many of them claim ancient and even mythological origins. Clan MacNeil trace their ancestry back to 5th century High King of Ireland and patron of St. Patrick, Niall of the 9 Hostages. Clan Campbell claim their progenitor to be Diarmuid the Boar, an Irish demigod akin to Hercules. Clans Grant, McKinnon, and Gregor report descent from Scotland's first king, Kenneth MacAlpin. Even immigrants from Normandy and Flanders formed clans Cameron, Fraser, Menzies, and Chisholm. During the Wars of Scottish Independence in the 1300s, King Robert the Bruce harnessed the power of the clans in his struggle against the English. He granted land charters to chiefs, thus formalizing their power and codifying it into law. From then on, clans operated much like the feudal system, which had come to dominate England and Europe. The king granted land to the chiefs, which they in turn rented out to their tenants. The common people paid rent and owed the chief military service. Chiefs kept most of the rent, but paid some on to the king, and they would rally their men to fight for his majesty. Lairds also operated under the chiefs as subletters. The only real difference between a clan chief and a feudal lord is better branding. Common people under the power of a clan often took the chief's surname as a show of loyalty and to curry favor. A common name ties the clan together and lends a sense of family and belonging. But in reality, common clansmen and the family of the chief were part of a different class and rarely intermarried. Instead, much like royalty, chiefs wed their offspring to the children of other clan chiefs to form alliances. For instance, in Outlander, Jaime's father was a member of Clan Fraser, while his mother was the daughter of the Mackenzie clan chief, and he has some loyalty to his maternal uncle. Your name may be Campbell, Mackenzie, or Stewart, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a close blood relation to the chiefs of that clan. More likely, your ancestors were commoners who worked on their land and fought their battles. However, aristocratic blood has a tendency to trickle down, and most people living in a common area were related to some degree. For example, my 7 times great-grandfather, John Bruce, who immigrated to Virginia in the mid-1700s, was born in Kincardine, Scotland, in the heart of Clan Bruce territory. I have traced his ancestry back 16 more generations to Robert V Bruce, grandfather of the famed Scottish king. So while my family does have a smidgen of royal Scottish blood and ties to Clan Bruce, there were a lot of farmers and soldiers between us and them. Whether closely related to the chief or not, members of a clan had a strong sense of community and loyalty. This was reinforced by regular clan gatherings, during which certain members would swear an oath of fealty to the chief. Clan membership greatly increased the chances of survival in the harsh, rugged landscape. Individual farmers and fishermen were protected from harassment by invading armies, cattle rustlers, and brigands. And the clan functioned as a social safety net when crops failed or family members were injured or died. People in the borderlands, Highlands, and Isles had very different challenges. Thus, unique local identities formed. But banding together could also have deadly consequences. Clans often had bloody disputes over borders. The most famous feud was between Clan MacLeod and Clan MacDonald, who shared the Isle of Skye. It began as a fight over fishing territory. The chiefs met and decided to forge peace through the union of their relatives, Margaret MacLeod and Donald MacDonald. The families agreed to a handfasting. The couple would live together for a year and a day. If, in that time, a male heir was produced, then a marriage would follow. But after the allotted time, Margaret had not borne any children, and she somehow lost her eye, probably due to her husband's abuse. Having no use for her, Donald tied poor Margaret facing backwards on a one-eyed horse, led by a one-eyed servant and followed by a one-eyed dog. When she arrived home, her brother was horrified at the abuse and the insult to himself. He took a band of MacLeods to the MacDonald-controlled island of Egg. They chased the inhabitants into a cave and set fire to the entrance. 395 people suffocated. The MacDonalds answered with setting fire to Trumpin Church while MacLeods were praying inside. The war raged for decades and cost hundreds of lives. Finally, in 1601, the Crown intervened and forced the two clans to make peace. The end of the feud was celebrated with 3 weeks of feasting at Dunvegan Castle. I had such an incredible time in bonny Scotland, but my Highland mood was slightly dampened when I got home and saw the bill from my mobile service provider. Regular carriers charge a ton for roaming and international data. So on my next trip to Germany, I'm going to save big by using Saely. All you have to do is download the Saely app, buy a plan, and install your eSIM. Saely has plans for over 160 countries in 8 regions, so you can connect your phone to the internet while you're abroad to help you find your way around, translate tricky words, share photos, and stay in touch with friends and family back home. I'm excited to spend the money I'll save on delicious German chocolate. Get an exclusive 15% off on Saely eSIM data plans. Download the Saely app and use code Lindsay, that's Lindsay, at checkout. And now, back to history. By the time the Stuarts came to the throne, power was more centralized, and kings didn't want to be challenged by the might of clan chiefs. In 1603, King James VI inherited the throne of England from his childless cousin Elizabeth I. James had a strong sense of his own divine right. He granted his Scottish allies peerage titles in the English fashion, but he had no time for disobedient chiefs. He undermined the clan system with the 1609 Statutes of Iona. It demanded that chiefs send their heirs to the lowlands to be educated. This measure was designed to wipe out the Gaelic tongue and make English the national language. Chiefs were also required to spend part of the year in Edinburgh or London. This distanced them from their people and pushed them to compete with each other over larger houses and finer garments, sending many into spirals of debt. They in turn raised rents on their tenants, who grew resentful of the increasingly distant chiefs. In 1688, the English kicked Catholic King James VII and II out and invited his Protestant daughter, Mary, and her Dutch husband, William, to take the throne. The Scots were still an independent country, and they were not pleased that the English were messing with their king. James, now in exile in France, suddenly saw a use for his ancestral homeland. He and his son, James Francis, tried several times to raise rebellions amongst their Scottish supporters, known as Jacobites, but all their efforts failed. In the 1690s, Scotland experienced devastating famines, and a scheme to set up a colony in Panama, which nearly every clan chief had invested in, failed. On the brink of financial ruin, the Scottish Parliament voted to dissolve itself and unite fully with England. The 1707 Act of Union gave birth to a new nation, Great Britain. The Union allowed Scotland's economy to flourish, but while the Lowlanders were enjoying the benefits, Highlanders saw little advantage. When James VII's grandson, Bonnie Prince Charlie, landed in 1745, he found a groundswell of support. Though the clan system was already limping, many clans were re-galvanized in the Jacobite cause. The chiefs were mostly opportunistic and only supported the prince if they thought it would benefit them. The Jacobites won a handful of battles and looked promising as they marched south. But squabbles between the prince and the chiefs about how to proceed saw the Jacobites turn and head north again. King George II sent his son, the Duke of Cumberland, to pursue them. After weeks marching away from victory, the tired, hungry, and disheartened Scots came head-to-head with the brunt of the British army on Culloden Moor. The Highlanders were heavily outnumbered, outgunned, and positioned on lower, muddy ground, but still they bravely charged. The battle lasted 40 minutes. When it was done, 50 government troops were lost, but 2,000 Jacobite soldiers lay dead. Prince George, who became known as the Butcher of Cumberland, ordered injured Highlanders to be murdered where they lay. Hundreds more who escaped were run down and executed in the following weeks. The victims of that bloody battle were laid to rest in mass graves under the field, with stones engraved with the names of their clans: Stuarts, Camerons, Frasers, McGillivrays, McLeans, McLaughlins, Athol Highlanders, Macintoshes, Campbells, McDonalds, and many others buried under the stone marked mixed clans lost their lives that day. The Battle of Culloden is often touted as the death knell of the clan system. It certainly did have a devastating effect on Scotland, and in its wake, Parliament passed laws designed to undermine the clan chief's power. They suppressed Highland culture by outlawing bagpipes, tartan, and kilts. But economic shifts were far more to blame for the downfall of the clans. With the chiefs living like English gentlemen, they doomed themselves with the Highland clearances. In their efforts to raise higher rents, they pushed common people off the small farms their families had worked for generations, and rented the land in bulk to large-scale cattle farms. The displaced tenants had no option but to work in fishing, collecting kelp, or mining, all much lower paid, dangerous, and generally miserable jobs. They complained to their clan chiefs of dúthchas, the centuries-old right of clansmen to rent land. But this had never been codified into law, and chiefs now conveniently saw themselves as commercial landlords rather than benevolent patriarchs. Some clan leaders, like Elizabeth Levinson Gower, Duchess of Sutherland, thought that they were helping their people to join the modern era, and were baffled by the complaints. Scots in America and beyond. As cobbled-together communities of evicted farmers became overcrowded, many were voluntold to clear off even further. Chiefs offered assisted passages to the colonies. In the 1700s, hundreds of thousands of Scots immigrated to North America. Lowlanders tended to settle in low-lying coastal areas like New York and New Jersey. As they spoke English, they found work easily as doctors and schoolmasters. Highlanders, who still primarily spoke Gaelic, settled in more isolated clusters in Georgia and western New York. The largest Highland community, hailing from the Isle of Skye, made the Cape Fear River in North Carolina their home. Both of these groups still felt strong ties to their clans, so remained loyal to the British when the American Revolution broke out. According to my own family records, my ancestor Robert Christie, born in 1759, was the son of the Scottish Laird of Beech Green. 17-year-old Robert joined the British Army and came to fight the colonists. He served under General Cornwallis and was at Yorktown when the Redcoats surrendered. After the war, he refused to return home, thus forfeiting the Scottish estate he would have inherited. He stayed in Williamsburg, Virginia, married, and lived to 1818. Many Lowlanders immigrated first to Ulster in Northern Ireland. They spent a few generations there before crossing the pond to America. They are known as the Scotch Irish, and many settled in the Appalachian Mountains. Bluegrass and country music takes great influence from traditional Gaelic music. Unlike the Loyalist Highlanders and Lowlanders, the Scotch Irish felt little clan loyalty and were largely in favor of independence. The fact that many tobacco plantations were financed by Scottish banks, whose ledgers would be wiped clean by a successful revolution, helped. It is important to acknowledge that there were many Scots, and likely some of my own ancestors, who were involved in forcing Native Americans off the land and who owned and brutalized enslaved people. 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Scotch-Irish. Charlotte, North Carolina, with its large Scotch-Irish population, issued their own Declaration of Independence a year earlier in 1775. Revolutionaries Commodore John Paul Jones, Generals Henry Knox, and William Alexander were all Scottish. General Hugh Mercer had even fought for Bonnie Prince Charlie at Culloden. After the United States won independence, Alexander Hamilton, grandson of the Laird of Grange, Ayrshire, was influenced by the economic theories of Scotsman Adam Smith when designing the first Bank of the United States. During the War of 1812, Scotsman Samuel Wilson provided the army with barrels of beef and pork, marked U.S. Soon, Uncle Sam became shorthand for the federal government. In Scotland, clans exist to this day, but they are a shadow of their former greatness. Of the 150 or so clan chiefs still around, 5 are dukes, 3 marquises, 24 earls, and 3 viscounts. In Scotland, the rank of baron is often replaced with laird or lady. And yes, unlike in England, women are permitted to inherit Scottish peerages and chiefdoms. Flora Fraser is the current chief of Clan Fraser. Some chiefs maintain ancient ancestral castles. Others live relatively average lives. But only 30% of modern Scottish families are attached to a clan. The clans seem to hold more meaning to the millions of people of Scottish descent living around the world. There are over 10 million in the US and Canada, considerably more than the 4.5 million in Scotland itself. In the early 1800s, many Scots immigrated to New Zealand, where the beautiful landscape echoes their homeland. Numerous Scottish churches and Caledonian societies were founded. The modern descendants of Scottish immigrants celebrate their heritage at Highland games and flings, and by wearing kilts in the tartan of their clan. But how did Highland dress survive Culloden and become the fashion statement synonymous with Scotland? Tartan and Kilts after 1745. The ban on Highland dress only lasted until 1782. But by then, the great kilt was seen by young Highlanders as the garb of their grandfathers and largely fell out of fashion. The only people who were allowed to sport tartan kilts during this era were women, the gentry, and members of Highland regiments of the British Army. The only way a common Scottish lad could wear his traditional dress was to join up with the enemy, and it was in the military that kilts got their myriad of regulations. When it is appropriate to wear, how high above the knee, how to position the sporran, and tie the laces of the brogues. Because the wealthy were also wearing kilts, they maintained an air of sophistication. In 1778, the Highland Society of London was formed. They petitioned for the repeal of the Dress Act. In the late early 1800s, the Enlightenment sparked cultural revolution in Scotland. Author Walter Scott wrote the bestseller Rob Roy in 1817. Much like Outlander, it romanticized the Highlands. After centuries without a single royal visit, in 1822, King George IV finally decided his northern kingdom was worth a wee shufty. Walter Scott arranged a pageant of bagpipers, drummers, and marching regiments, all smartly dressed in colorful and exotic tartan kilts. The king, who fancied himself a dandy, adored wearing a kilt, though others often snickered at the bright pink stockings he wore underneath. The tartan kilt was suddenly in vogue. But local weavers using whatever dyes were lying around was not up to the standard of the Industrial Revolution. Synthetic dyes allowed for bright colors, and it was said that the Burn River flowed yellow, red, green, etc. based on the color being produced. Textile manufacturer Wilson and Sons of the lowland city of Bannockburn created a pattern book of 240 tartans, each assigned to a different clan. Some of these were based on popular patterns in a particular clan territory, but many were just made up. Chiefs of the Highland Society of London collected samples of their so-called traditional tartans to preserve for posterity. However, most had actually come from Bannockburn. Highland Society members also created clan badges. Early clan members did decorate their caps with local flora. The MacDonalds wore sprigs of heather, and the Macintoshes sported holly. Badges consist of a symbol of the clan, encircled by the motto. For common members, it is written on a belt, symbolizing that the clan is joined together. For the chief, the badge is placed over 3 eagle feathers. In 1847, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert purchased Balmoral and constructed their own fairy tale castle in the Highlands. They went tartan mad, and the rest of the UK followed. Victoria further popularized Scotland as a holiday destination, and tartan and kilts as a symbol of the country. She even got her own Balmoral tartan, which her descendants wear to this day. Tartans are not limited to clans. There are patterns for sports teams, companies, special events, schools and universities, and even a Princess Diana memorial tartan. In the 1970s, tartan, particularly the Royal Stuart pattern, was adopted by the punk subculture. Punks were re-subverting what had originally been associated with the resistance and had been co-opted by the establishment. Designer Alexander McQueen crafted many groundbreaking garments with his nation's greatest textile. Today, people who are drawn to the beautiful design of tartan and the dashing look of a kilt, which are now made for all genders with comfortable linings and convenient pockets, may wonder if it is appropriate for them to wear. The fashion's history of military and aristocratic regulations has lent it a sense of foreboding formality and possibly even cultural appropriation. But all the Scots I talk to and learn from are generally not uptight about the use of their national fabric and dress. They are quite happy for anyone to enjoy tartan and kilts without following a ton of formal rules or adhering to a particular clan pattern. So whether you want to celebrate your own clan heritage, your love of bonnie Scotland, your passion for fashion, or your fascination with Outlander, wear your bonnie tartan kilt with pride. Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast. You can now follow History Tea Time on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also join my Patreon to support my work and get early access to all of my multi-part series. Thank you for watching.